basically. Another thing is player can experience and influence a story together. This is what we call cooperative or multiplayer play. So you could have a story-driven game, and you could let two people try to experience the story and the game world together, and via online, via all sorts of means. And the way they play together, they can influence the world. Something which is very, very difficult to do, because suddenly you've got two people in the world where you don't really have control over. And games also, which is quite nice, allow easier creation of new content. For example, we created this game called The Movies, which was originally just a simulation of a movie studio. You started in the 1920s, and you were supposed to create this movie studio and create movies and get audience and get the audience, and you would progress up until until 2000, and you got new technologies and everything. But we also we allowed people to literally shoot little movies in the game. So we had loads of different assets and a mechanism where people could select scenes, cut them together, put voiceover in there and everything. And people went off and did that. They didn't play the game, mostly didn't play the game for the experience of running a studio. They played it because they wanted to create little movies. And then what we then did is we created like a virtual online community where people from the game could upload their videos and show it to other people who didn't have the game, for example. And there's a nice story of a guy who, a French guy who created a movie called The French Democracy, and that happened just a few days after the French riot happened in Paris. And he said he traded in his old game in order to get the movies, in order to create this little story, and then he just put it online. And then a few days later, we suddenly realised that loads of press is linking to that movie, and apparently it was like the first narration of those events. It came before any TV documentary or documentation or film or book came out. It was just like within a space of 5 days, this guy created his idea of what the riots meant. And he got interviewed by, I think, different TV stations, and he got mentioned everywhere. So another way what games can do differently to movies as well. We just gave them the platform to do it. But there's also obviously the obvious thing, how games and movies influence each other. And a game or movie can extend each other's universe, or film, game tie-in. They complement each other. And most of the time nowadays you find you get a movie and then somebody does a game out of it, and often you replay the same story of the hero of the movie. Now that's not what we actually mean with tie-in or extend the universe. There are games where they extend the brand of a movie or like a TV series, and you experience a different part of the universe. So you can tell other stories which you couldn't tell in the movie or in the TV series or whatever you want to use, and you can complement that basically by creating a game which shows a different side of your universe or the story you want to show. And games also allow people to express their creativity. Well, I just mentioned now with the French guy, but also there's little movies called machinima, which is people play games and record the footage of the game, and then they cut together their own little movies, and then they obviously post them on the internet. And that way, gamers use games as a tool, as a cheap tool to create their own stories, really, because they don't have any other means often. And movies have an established emotional language games should know from. This is another thing where, for example, we games are not good at. Movies have had 200 years, 100 and something years, many years, in order to establish like a cinematic language, and a language that delivers emotion. We all subconsciously know about it. When we're watching a cinema, we all feel sad when something sad happens, and that's not only because the actor's crying, that's because everything is supported by it as well, which we games don't do that well. But we have to be careful as games that we just don't create a movie, basically, where the player only sees like what we call cutscenes and can not really interact with it. And games also slowly start stories and plot seriously. Like 20 years ago, the stories were designed by programmers and designers, and they just sat together and thought, what's cool words, and often it would be like wizards and strange universes and dragons and all that stuff, and then they just try to make a really complex story about it without knowing what storytelling actually is. And you often find games early, you bought like a game, and you got a little book with the game explaining you in 300 pages the story about the game, so you had to read the whole book in order to understand the game. And that was a bit too much for most people, because they just wanted to go, put the game in and play the game. We know what games are doing wrong, but we start doing it right. We try, basically. But games, for example, are not movies. That's the most essential thing. So we just shouldn't do like straight conversions, or should just do interactive movies where the games where the player hasn't really much control. Players shouldn't be told stories, they should experience stories. This is the major difference, what we call it. We want people to experience stories. So you don't want to be told the story, you want to be part of it. People tell stories afterwards. After you play the game, you can go to your friends and you tell them you've played this game and you played it this way. This is when you do the storytelling itself. But movies can teach games how to convey emotions. Again, one thing which I mentioned before we completely lack, and where we have to get better. And that's what we have to be careful that we don't, overdo it, and that we develop our own language. We focus too much on the game mechanics and gameplay, but we often don't know how to package it up nicely. Well, that's kind of like games are often built on kind of like this core mechanics. I've got this brilliant idea of doing this or of doing that, or I've got this brilliant AI which is perfect, or I've got this where you can pet you get a creature and you can pet it and everything. And then at the end we put a story on top and hope that the player gets involved and immersed without realizing that actually what you should do first is we should create a story experience for the game, and then we should create all our assets and everything we have, creative and technical, in order to support that story experience, and not just bolt it on at the end. So this is how we will deliver stories experiences in the future. This is what we hope. Is every quest, level, character, sound effect, prop, game mechanic, or technology has to be designed in line with the story experience we want to deliver. This is something games don't do. When you, for example, we've got people called like creature designers, which design creatures, and the way they design creatures is they do it completely on their own. They don't do it necessarily in line with the whole story experience and everything. They're just there to build this one big creature, and they do all the research and how realistic that creature needs to be and everything, but they don't adapt it to the way how you want to convey a story. Another thing is eliminate traditional cutscenes. Oh god, we games are really good at that. We create cutscenes, and with cutscenes it's a thing that you have to deliver information for the player so he knows how to continue with the game. But what we make players actually do is watch cutscenes and cutscene and cutscene. There's a film-like sequences which the game can't skip, and he's bored because we've taken the interactivity away. The gamer can't do anything during those cutscenes. He just suddenly becomes, from the participant, he becomes the audience again, and that's I think what loads of players just disapprove of. Also, what we don't really do is we don't show that much. We rather tell. We're really bad in writing dialogue. I mean, if you've looked for some games, some of the dialogue though, because it's very technical. You have to explain to people what they have to do and everything, and you also have to try to wrap it up emotionally and everything, and that doesn't work properly. So we have to look into those things, which we are doing. And also, another thing is that player needs to feel that what he does makes sense to him and is what he wants to do. Now, this is quite important, as if you give the player at least the illusion that he knows what he's doing in this game, he knows the story experience. Thank you.